Up Close is presented by Tennova Healthcare, with 6 hospitals and more than 1,000 dedicated physicians. For more information, tennova.com.
Thanks for joining us for Up Close. I'm Stephanie Aldrich. This week we take a closer look at the art of coffee. Whether you start your day strong and basic black with a latte or a sweet mocha, creating that perfect brew in East Tennessee became one man's mission. After an engineering career took John Clark out of state for a few years, he returned to his hometown of Maryville, determined to recreate the West Coast coffee flavors he now craved. Even with long-established Tennessee coffee companies before him, Clark saw a business opportunity brewing. What was first just a garage hobby with a few pounds of coffee beans is today the Vienna Coffee Company, a full-fledged roastery and coffee house. The roastmaster took us behind the scenes at the newly expanded space in Maryville. Well, John, you grew up in Maryville, but you found a love for coffee once you left for a little while. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. Well, we relocated from East Tennessee to San Francisco, or the San Francisco Bay Area. And if you're familiar with San Francisco, there's a gourmet coffee shop on practically every corner. So we got used to drinking good, dark roasted specialty coffees. Pete's is out there. Starbucks got its kind of genesis out there. The dark roasted specialty coffee industry is very vibrant in and around San Francisco. So we became a part of that, and I love drinking lattes and cappuccinos and just dark roasted bold coffees. It became part of our everyday habits. Moved back to East Tennessee, and back in '96 when we moved back, there was really no specialty coffee in town. There was not a Starbucks here. There was nobody doing specialty coffee, and so the commercial blends were available, and I drank them, but I didn't really enjoy it like I had become accustomed to. So I said, well, I can fix that.
You remember that first cup out there when you were just kind of like, whoa, it was really that different to you?
Well, I went out. I was working here in Knoxville at the time for an engineering firm that was acquired by a West Coast company, and I was part of the transition team. And I went out, and there was an engineer working with me who had been to Pete's and become a fan of Pete's coffee, one of the grandfathers of the industry. And he poured me a drip filter coffee of a dark roasted blend of Pete's, and I thought, oh my goodness, what a difference. I didn't know there could be that much difference in coffee. And yeah, it was a wow moment for me.
John, you had a very different career at one time, but one that has served you very well in the coffee business.
I am a chemical engineer. Once you're an engineer, you're always an engineer. And so I was doing hazardous waste management and chemical waste cleanup, and my sort of specialty in the arena was combustion of wastes. And so several steps through my career, I'd been involved with incineration and burning of chemicals. And burning of chemicals is not unlike burning of coffee. With coffee, you just have to know when to stop. With chemicals, you want it to be completely burnt up. With coffee, you've got a sweet spot. You got to stop just in time. And so that was the big difference. But temperature management, heat transfer, air management, all of those issues were sort of second nature to me because I'd done them for 27 years. And that helped me climb the learning curve when I decided I was going to roast coffee.
Sure. So you mentioned you came back to Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times when people miss their, favorite hamburger from another state or barbecue or whatever, they're just like, well, I'll just have to go back and visit. But that wasn't good enough for you.
No. The two things I missed were sourdough bread. If you've been to San Francisco, you know their sourdough is second to none. And then their dark roasted coffee. So since I am an engineer and a tinkerer, I said, well, I can fix that problem. I haven't fixed the sourdough bread problem, but I fixed the good coffee problem. So I went on the internet and bought some specialty grade coffee beans, the better beans that are required to do good coffee. And I started roasting in a popcorn popper. I had sort of learned how by picking up a book by a man named Kenneth Davids, Home Coffee Roasting, and I bought it at a local bookstore and found a popcorn popper, which was his introduction into the business, or into the hobby, if you will. So I'd buy these really good coffees and roast them in a popcorn popper. The very first batch was actually on my stove in my kitchen, and I smoked up the room terribly. So that was the last batch I got to do in the house. My wife sent me out onto the deck after that. And
take your hobby into the deck or take it out to the garage, right?
Take it outside, honey. But yeah, we started in a popcorn popper. And when you're buying the best beans, even a popcorn popper can generate better coffee. I got pretty good at it, started giving a lot of it away. My friends and coworkers and relatives would enjoy my coffee and encourage me.
And you just put it in a little bag or something and share it, right?
Yeah,
you just
yeah,
take it to the
Ziploc bag.
office, or...
Ziploc bag. So you in the detonator, the pan-like coffee maker, you can do perhaps as much as 8 or 10 ounces at a time. In a air popper, which was kind of the next generation of my evolution of the coffee roasting, you can only do 2.5 ounces at a time. So it's basically one pot. But it's excellent coffee, so I'd do one pot and I'd taste it and say, ooh, that's good. And then I'd do another pot and another pot and another pot. And I spent a fair amount of time perfecting the roast color and how dark I liked to take the coffees and which ones I liked best and where to get them.
So this is a pretty serious, detailed hobby here. You're really paying attention.
Well, I'm an engineer. You
you
don't get over that.
That's right. It's in your DNA, right?
Right. So yeah, I studied it, and I had roast profiles written out so I could reproduce what I had done before, and so I became pretty serious hobbyist. And to that point, I had only been roasting in a popcorn popper, but it was still getting a little bit expensive because I was giving a lot away.
Right.
But then I'm an engineer, design and build combustion equipment, so I said, okay, I'll build myself a coffee roaster. So I started designing a roaster and had it partially drawn and was looking for spare parts to build it out of. And while I was surfing the internet looking for parts, I found on eBay a fully functional, well, not fully functional, a fully commercial roaster in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. There was a coffee house roastery up there that was trading up, and they had this red roaster over here available for sale. So I bought it and shipped it down here, and when I got it, it didn't work very well. They were not mechanical, and they didn't realize some of the issues that needed fixing on it. They just knew it didn't work well. So
but you figured you could fix it.
I could fix it, and it was such a simple fix. So I got a real steal on that roaster because they thought it didn't work well, and all I had to do was tweak one little thing, and it worked like a champ. So now I was burning 15 pounds of coffee at a time, and that gets expensive. You know, you start buying the best coffee you can, roast 15 pounds of it, and you can't drink it all.
Right.
So what do? You give it away.
And that was a big leap, as far as an amount, from a popcorn popper to now this roaster. But at that point, this is still just a pretty serious hobby. You just wanted to make more of something you were enjoying, right?
Very much a hobby. Meanwhile, my brother and I had bought a coffee company, and that's sort of another story. He had been hearing my sister and I talk about coffee for years, months anyway.
Right.
And his favorite coffee shop came up for sale in Miami. It was called the Vienna Coffee House and Bistro. And so he calls me up one day and says, hey, John, you want to buy a coffee shop? So I was roasting at the time, but just hobby level. And I said, sure, I'll go in with you. And so we bought a little coffee shop in Miami, and he operated it, and I was the silent partner. Interestingly, nobody had in this country had taken ownership of the name Vienna Coffee in a big way. So when we bought Vienna Coffee House and Bistro, chose to name our coffee roasting business after that, and we became Vienna Coffee Company. It was dumb luck that Vienna is one of the world's great addresses for coffee. Vienna, Austria, Coffee houses in Vienna are renowned as places of intellectual community. That's where Mozart wrote sonatas, and Marx wrote his manifesto. I mean, all sorts of things happened in Vienna coffee houses, and so we are hoping to establish a community center, a community space where people come as their third place. You know, the first place is your home, the second place is your business, and I want this place to be people's third place, where they go when they're not at home or at work.
At what point did you think maybe I should do more with this and not just give my product away?
Well, that was along about 2001. I was working for a company that designed burners for chemicals, and yet we were in an industry that was kind of consolidating, and so I could see that our company was not thriving anymore, and so one was giving away too much coffee, and two was looking around to see if, you know, what the next step for me might be. And so I said, well, I'll just form the company, and so I established as an LLC in 2001, and was kind of ready to go if things worked out. And sure enough, in 2002, the company that I worked for was bought by a competitor, and they said, John, we really like you, we want you to move to Philadelphia. And I said, well, I'm kind of having fun with coffee, I think I'll stay in East Tennessee. And that's when I really got serious about coffee.
Tell me more about your process itself. It all starts with the bean, correct?
Coffee is a small tree that grows generally in the tropical climates, high elevations. It'll grow at low elevations too, but the good stuff, the Arabica varietal, will only thrive at high elevations. And so generally it's steep mountainous regions in tropical countries. Tropical countries are typically fairly economically disadvantaged, and so you've got small plot farmers that are growing a lot of the world's better coffees. And coffee matures, it flowers, green coffee, nearly ripe coffee, ripe red coffee, and raisins, all on the same cluster. So if you just strip that, you get overripe, underripe, and everything in between. And so the only way to get really specialty grade coffee is to hand pick just the ripe coffees several times through the season. And that's one of the big differences between commodity grades coffee and specialty grade is our suppliers are small plot farmers typically that hand pick and select out only the best coffees and sell them specifically into our specialty coffee market. They're graded. You know, they don't make the specialty market if they don't meet a certain quality standard, and they demand a higher price point in the growing regions as well as here. So.
And can you speak more specifically what countries some of these come from? You talked about the climate and the landscape, but is that constantly changing? Are you always trying to find beans from other places, or do you stay pretty consistent?
Well, I buy coffees from all of the growing regions, not every growing country. Brazil is the largest exporter of coffee in the world. Mm-hmm. These are Brazilian coffees, and we buy a fair amount of Brazilian coffee, but you've got the full gamut. You've got commodity grade coffee from Brazil, and you've got very fine specialty grade coffees out of Brazil too. So the trick is finding the supply chain in each growing country that yields up the best beans.
It sounds like just to get to the point of having it in the bag here at your operation here, it's a very time-consuming process, and you got to be a little patient too, I would imagine.
Well, yeah, a lot of the work goes on in the growing regions. These small plot farmers that I mentioned, the fact that they do so much to the coffee before we get it is what really sets the quality. So they pick just the red ripe coffees. They say solo rojo in the Spanish-speaking countries. And then they strip the pulp off of them, ferment the beans to get the mucilage off, wash them, dry them on patios or raised beds and racks. And so they have weeks and weeks and weeks of effort to get the coffee before it's ready to export. And then what we do is really just try not to mess up their good work, because they've done the heavy lifting, they've done all the laborious work, and as long as we take care of the coffee and roast it well, then get it out to the market very quickly after we've roasted it, then we're doing our part in the supply chain.
Relatively speaking, the people who pick the beans live a rather meager lifestyle compared to us. How do coffee companies deal with that criticism that might come along from time to time?
Well, it's an issue that a lot of people in the coffee business are concerned about. The fair trade and direct trade movements within specialty coffee are in direct response to that very issue. Fair trade is a movement that started largely in the coffee business with when the markets are depressed and these subsistence farmers are just scraping by growing good coffee. It's too easy for them to give it up and go somewhere else and do something more lucrative. And so, as a defense mechanism years ago, smart people in the specialty coffee business said, well, we need to support those people better so that they won't give up their farms and they will keep growing and picking these excellent coffees. And so fair trade started as a movement to support the farmers with sort of a, I don't like to use the term price support, but in essence it's a minimum price below which the farmer can be assured, if he's in the fair trade system, that he's not going to have to sell his coffee below that.
John, tell me more about the machinery, just how it works and then gives us ultimately that good cup of coffee.
It's a big drum, rotating drum, not unlike your dryer. It's just hotter. We've got a 250,000 BTU burner under the production roaster, and so it'll burn a big hot flame, and the hot gases from that burner are drawn up into the drum, and the coffee beans are just tumbling in the drum like clothes in a clothes dryer. Mm-hmm. And so the air that we're heating with the burner passes across the coffee and through the roaster and imparts its heat into the beans. And over the course of about 13 to 18 minutes, depending on which coffee we're roasting and how dark we're trying to take it, they'll go from the green little hard bean-like, dry bean-like pieces you see to a much more brittle, larger brown coffee bean, mm-hmm. like in the grocer's shelves. And so my roaster's job is to nurture those green coffees from hard, moist little beans to through first crack, where they kind of begin the roasting process, into the end point that we want to end with. And she will pull a trier out and look at the color and smell it and look for the glistening oil, all signals to her that she's getting close to the end of the roast. And when it's just right, she dumps the beans into a cooling bin, and then they're as perfect as we can make them, so we want to stop that process right away. And so we've got a big fan that pulls the smoke and all of our air conditioning across the beans to quench them as quickly as possible. So we'll roast in, say, 15 minutes, and then she will quench in about 4 minutes back down to room temperature, so that the process of roasting stops right there.
Sure.
And quench is equally as important as the roast, because if you let them keep cooking, you get a different product.
How many different blends do you have going at any one moment?
Well, it changes somewhat, but we have 5 or 6 big popular blends. Most popular is Front Porch Breakfast Blend. It's a medium body, medium dark coffee that has a very nice sweetness to it, derived from primarily a Mexican bean. Our biggest volume coffee in restaurants and like is Highlands Blend. It's a coffee that's medium to full body, derived largely from a Guatemalan bean. but it's also a little darker, and it's quite popular to our restaurant customers because it's dark enough to be distinct from, again, commodity coffee, but it's not so dark that people who like the lighter coffees are turned off by it. It's a good restaurant blend.
And then, of course, there's a quality control element here. You have to do tastings kind of similar to a wine tasting, but this has its own special name.
Yeah, the quality control step in coffee is called cupping. And in essence, it's a fairly ritualistic approach to grinding, putting just the right amount of coffee in the cup, pouring the right temperature water on it, letting it sit just the right amount of time. And the reason you do it so ritualistically is so that it's reproducible. You want exactly the same result so that you can make a judgment on whether or not the coffee is what you expected it to be and what you want.
When do you think we, as just a coffee drinking population, got so picky about our coffee? Our grandparents would think that we were crazy to spend close to the $5 mark to get a specialty coffee or a mocha or what, all these fancy names. When did we get so picky?
Well, you're right. Our grandparents would think we're crazy with the way we treat it now, but honestly, they got to drink better coffee than our parents did. In the old days, the agribusiness wasn't doing the same commoditization of the coffees, and so specialty, the commodity coffees were closer to specialty coffees of today.
They were better.
They were better. They were better. And you know, the CPAs that got involved and drove down the cost of some of the coffees, and so the business took over, and our parents didn't really have the choices that we have to drink better.
Why is it, do you think, that when so many of us are tightening up our budget, there's not a lot of extra money for entertainment and things, and people have to cut back, why do you think people are still willing to walk into a coffee shop, yours or someone else's, and spend money on coffee rather than just brewing a cup at home?
Well, community is a big part of it. The fact that they can get coffees that they wouldn't get at home. We have a drip bar, we have an espresso machine, we do all the blended drinks, and so those drinks are not something you just brew up and get out of your Mr. Coffee machine. And so the variety is a big part of it. The community is a big part of it, and we hope to encourage that element of it further. And honestly, it's a little luxury. Times, particularly the last few years, have been pretty difficult for a lot of people, and a good cup of coffee, a good latte, a perfect cappuccino is a little luxury that they can still afford, even if they can't buy a new car. And so we think the coffee business has held up pretty well through this recessionary time. Largely because it is an affordable luxury, and as more and more people grow to appreciate specialty coffee, they realize it's an affordable luxury that suits their lifestyle, and it's a little luxury.
What does it mean to you to sort of come full circle and have this business in your hometown? You know, you were exposed to the coffee out west. The name came from a shop that was in Miami. Mm-hmm. What does it mean to you to now have Vienna Coffee in Maryville?
Well, I'm very proud to have brought specialty coffee to Maryville. Every day, people I went to high school with come into the shop and congratulate me, and so I mean, it's a charge. I love it. The fact that I was able to do it here is it's just a dream come true.
And from roasting just a few bags here and there for friends, today the Vienna Coffee Company roasts about 3,000 pounds of coffee beans each week. You'll find Vienna Coffee in supermarkets in the Pick Tennessee aisle, as well as local restaurants and coffee shops, including Vienna's Coffee House on College Street in Maryville. Be sure and join us next week for another edition of Up Close. I'm Stephanie Aldrich.
Up Close is presented by Tennova Healthcare, with 6 hospitals and more than 1,000 dedicated physicians. For more information, tennova.com.